12 years ago, I started coming to this church, and my son Brian said, "Boy, Daddy, we've got an old 80-year-old guy that can preach like mad." I'm a little more than 80 years old, and I'm here. You know, the Seventh-day Adventist Church had its roots in the awakening, the Second Awakening. And Adventists began developing their belief system, and it caused a lot of difficulties in some churches. In fact, there are some Adventist people that have been going to church for years and were dismissed or disfellowshipped because of their beliefs. And so the early Adventists felt that they had to argue and convince other churches and other people about their faith, their belief system. And so they became very argumentative, and it was quite common to have debates going on. In fact, some Adventist debaters took pride in the fact that they could best their opponents. And it's interesting to me that argumentative, what I call speaking to people's heads, is filtered down over the years. Instead of speaking to the heart, they were speaking to people's heads. And it colored the literature that the church developed. It colored family discussions. And I know the shades of argumentation and speaking to the head filtered down even to my day. When I was a little boy, we always had an evangelist come every year to conduct evangelism in our little church in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. 7th Street, tiny little place, squeezed between two homes. And as far as I know, nobody in the city really knew that the church existed. But these evangelists would come to town, and they would rent the Oddfellows Hall to conduct their meetings, because we didn't want anybody to get the idea that the meetings were conducted by Seventh-day Adventists. Some of you are shaking your head. You know those days. And so they rented the Oddfellows Hall, and the evangelists would speak to the heads. And people came because it was easier to listen to appeals to the head than to the heart. And until they got to the Sabbath, when the evangelists talked about the Sabbath and the state of the dead, the Oddfellows Hall just emptied out. And the evangelist would pick up his Bible and leave for the next appointment. And my Uncle Scotty, he would take the meetings to the church on 7th Street and cancel the rental at the Oddfellows Hall. And Uncle Scotty had a little projector with film strips, and he had a material all printed out, and he would read all these remaining topics, speaking to the head. And that's the way I grew up. That was my influence. Talked to my wife. On Sabbath, the president of the college, Washington Missionary College, and the conference president would come to her folks' house for Sabbath dinner. And after dinner, they would have hot discussions about Armageddon. And she tried to escape to her bedroom to avoid the firing back and forth, you know. Sometimes she couldn't escape. I went to college, and guess what? I went to Bible doctrines class where we had to memorize 10 proof texts for everything that the church believed. So that when I became a pastor, I could nail the opponents to the wall. I learned how to speak to the head. Then I became a pastor, and the preachers had to spend a week or two getting the campgrounds ready for camp meeting. And at night we would sleep in the vacant cafeteria on pads or mattresses scattered on the floor. I tried to go to sleep. I couldn't go to sleep very well because the preachers were arguing about righteousness by faith, perfectionism, you name it, on and on and on, things of very little consequence. And finally, I tuned it out enough so that I could fall asleep. We were still back speaking to the head. And then I was expected to go to an old hotel in upstate New York where we were going to be taught how to get the latter rain, how to get the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. It was interesting. In the morning, our teacher taught us how to be poor sports on the volleyball court. And then in the afternoon, we were taught that we can bring the Holy Spirit down by fasting and prayer, which irritated all of the diabetics in the group. Interesting. Speaking to the head was very difficult for me. I had a hard time with it. And I thought it would never really penetrate my thinking until the first week in a church where I pastored for the summer. One of the church members died, and I was supposed to have the funeral. Now, I'd never had a funeral before. I didn't even know how to have a funeral. All I knew was that people needed to understand that their loved one would be sleeping in the grave until Jesus comes, and there would be a happy reunion. So I preached the funeral service. And I made a lot of other boo-boos along the way. And riding in the hearse back to the funeral home, the funeral director said to me, young man, if you ever need to have some help in knowing how to conduct funerals, I'd be glad to help you. Just come by the office. Well, that really got me to thinking. All I did was talk to the head at that funeral and never talk to the heart. And so I got some books on conducting the funeral, and I did some real soul searching. In addition to that, I spent a lot of time studying the life of Jesus. And I want to tell you, if you want to know how to be a good Christian and how to work for the Lord, study the life of Jesus. I'll just share a few of the passages that I read among many others. Matthew 25, starting in verse 31. When the Son of Man comes as King and all the angels with him, he will sit on his royal throne, and the people of all the nations will be gathered together before him. Then he will divide them into two groups, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the righteous people at his right and the others on his left. And then the king will say to the people on the right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Come and possess the kingdom which has been prepared for you ever since the creation of the world. I was hungry, and you fed me, thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you received me in your homes. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you took care of me. In prison, and you visited me." The righteous will then answer him, "When, Lord, did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? When did we ever see you a stranger and welcome you in our home, or naked and clothe you? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visited you?" The king will reply, "I tell you, whenever you did this for me, whenever you did this for one of the least important of these brothers of mine, you did it for me." Another passage that I always enjoy was the 11th chapter of Matthew and verse 28. "Come to me, all of you who are tired from carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke and put it on you, and learn from me, because I am gentle and humble in spirit, and you will find rest. For the yoke I will give you is easy, and the load I will put on you is light." And then I always enjoy the 9th chapter of Matthew in verse 13. "It is kindness that I want." It is kindness that I want. Amazing. I've done a lot of soul searching over the years, because reading the life of Jesus, I realized that Jesus commissioned us to complete and continue his ministry. That's what we're all about. Completing, continuing the ministry of Jesus. So I did a lot of soul searching. I had a habit of putting all my sermons, written word for word, into a little brown manila envelope, and then I'd put those envelopes in the file until I had a whole file full of envelopes with sermons. And one day, I went through my file cabinet, and on each of the envelopes was marked the title of the sermon that was inside. And I was horrified how many of the sermons were talking to the head instead of the heart. And so I went through my sermon file, and I threw out a lot of them. And the ones that were left behind, when I would open them and read them, I didn't want to preach them again. In fact, I believe what Robert Murray McShane said, the Irish preacher, years and years ago. He said, "We should speak as broken to the broken." You like that? We should speak, and I put act as broken to the broken. And I find that if I would say, "God, this is another day. Please bring somebody into my life that I can touch for you." And I've found that it works. God always brings somebody into your life that needs to have a heart lift. Okay? Always brings somebody into your life that needs a heart lift. I taught school for 5 years when I got out of college. And I went to a teacher's institute one time when they taught us how to make nice bulletin boards. Isn't that exciting? As a first-year teacher, I had to know how to make Jesus appealing to boys and girls. I let them make the bulletin boards, no matter how they looked. I had 2 little boys in my 7th grade class. Their daddy was a preacher. And one day he was on the road in his VW bus, where you sit right up front, head-on collision. He was killed instantly. And my 2 little 7th grade boy, after the funeral, they came to school. And every day for weeks, they stayed after school and clung to me like I was a substitute father. One of those boys became a teacher in Ozark Adventist Academy. And he was here for quite a while. And when he left, I understand he was greatly missed, because I know that boy spoke to the hearts of the students at the academy. I had only been a pastor for 2 weeks, I think, and telephone rang. I'm telling you these stories because I want to get you excited about speaking to the heart of people that you meet. But I got this telephone call, and the person on the other end said, "Are you the pastor of the Lakewood Seventh Adventist Church?" "Yes, sir." He said, "We have one of your parishioners in our intensive care unit." And he said, "We physicians have done everything we know to do, but he's not responding. He had a heart attack. He's not responding. We've tried everything we know to do, and finally, we agreed that what really he needed was spiritual care, but that's not our bag. We thought maybe you could do that." Hey, I'm a neophyte, and I'm supposed to take care of a man with a heart attack? All the way to that hospital, I prayed and prayed. I got to the hospital, and I don't know everything that I talked about, but I know one thing. I told him that he was very precious to Jesus, that his church was very precious, that he was precious to me as a friend. And I know I talked about those things, and every day I'd go to visit him in the intensive care unit. Years later, I went to Ohio to the camp meeting, and this man met me and took me to meet his family. And you know what he said? "I want to meet you. I want to introduce you to the man who saved my life." Man who saved his life. I spoke to the heart, and what a reward that was. They sent me down to Portsmouth, Ohio, and I was to take the place of, Glenn Hill. He was a pastor in Portsmouth, and he was going to Andrews University to finish his master's degree, and they asked me to go to Portsmouth and pastor the church while he was getting school learning. And first week I was there, I got a call from a church member and said, "You've got to go see so-and-so. She's in a hospital. She was struck by a train. And she and her sister were thrown out of the automobile. Her sister landed on top of her, and she's comatose. I'd never met anybody who was comatose. I went to the intensive care unit and I froze. I didn't know what to say. Would she hear me? And finally, a nurse saved the day, and she told me that you just talk to a comatose person like you talk to anybody else. And that's what I did. But I did it real fast. And I said a real short prayer and headed for the door. And I thank that nurse because many years later, our son Jeff was pastoring the church in Corning, New York. And this boy learned how to speak to the heart, I'll tell you. And one of his church members, his name was Al, was in the hospital, and Jeff said, "Daddy, would you go along with me to the hospital to visit Al?" I said, "Sure, be glad to go along." We went into the ICU, and the nurse came in with us, and she said, "Now, fellows, you have to understand that Al is comatose, and he probably won't hear you." But my boy that knew how to speak to the heart went up to Al's bed, and his usual way of talking to Al said, "Hi, Al." And he said, "Hi, Pastor." He responded to someone who spoke to the heart. Somebody in New Haven, Connecticut, apparently knew a woman. She wasn't a member of my church. And this person said, "You know, you really ought to go to the hospital. My friend has bone cancer, the last stages of bone cancer. She can't even turn over in bed. If she does, she breaks a bone. But the husband won't let anybody visit her, especially from the church. She is in a little room with no windows, and she's very close to death." So I said, "Well, this is another opening. God has introduced me as something else I can do." So I went to the hospital, or to the home, and I told the husband that he didn't have to come into the room with me. I would just visit by myself. He seemed to be good with that. I went into the room, and I told his wife who I was, and I sat down on a chair next to her, the head of her bed. Never forget this woman. I said, "What can I do for you?" She said, "You can tell me how to get to heaven. You can tell me how to get to heaven." So I called her by name, and I said, "You need to know that Jesus is your friend. He loves you so much that he's making a new house for you in heaven. And all you have to do is accept his friendship." She said, "I'm too weak to pray. Could you pray that I could accept his friendship?" And so I prayed. 2 weeks after that, I got another phone call. Now she is in intensive care unit, and a little area all by herself. Nobody's there. Husband's not there. Family's not there. She is so sick, and the bones are so brittle that they have a tent over her body so that the sheets do not press against her. I tell you, that was one visit when I knew God was talking through me. I wasn't talking. I went to the head of her bed, I took her hand in mine. And you know what she said? Don't leave me. Don't leave me. She gripped my hand so hard. You'd think that she was a weightlifter. She gripped my hand, and I prayed that God would give her peace. And I kept praying that God would give her peace. And little by little, the grip loosened, and finally, it was limp, and she was gone. I thank God that I could speak to the heart, because that's what I was doing by His grace. I believe that when you pray and say, God, please open up the way for me to do somebody some good, I think God really does open the way for you. I told you about this before, but it's worth repeating. This was down in Hamlet, Ohio. That's a little town just south of Cincinnati. And I had a membership in that church of about 120, 140. I had a list of visits I was going to make. And I got to the end of my list. I thought, well, I'll go home. So I pulled out of that last driveway, went out to a T. I needed to turn right to go home. I turned left. And I said to myself, why am I going left? Why am I going? I'll find a driveway and I'll turn around and go back. But I couldn't find a driveway. I couldn't find any place that it was safe to turn around. So I kept going. Now I'm about a mile from the Ohio River. And all of a sudden I see a mailbox, and it has Smith written on it. And then I remembered there was an old church guest book. And in that guest book, there was someone who visited the Hamlet church by the name of Smith. I said, well, maybe I should go in and say hello. So I went in, and it was a white house, but it was weather-beaten and old and disrepair. And I went in, went up to the front porch. A woman about 80, maybe even 90 years came to the door. And I told her, I saw the name on the mailbox, and I thought maybe you're the family that came to visit our church. Oh, son, come in, come in. I've been praying that God would come and comfort me. Ooh, what goes through you almost like shivers. I've been praying that someone would come and pray with me and read the scriptures. So I went into this. Some of you will recognize what I'm talking about. A rug on the floor that's well worn, overstuffed furniture that should have been replaced 20, 30 years ago. And she welcomed me in, and I sat down. She said, my sister who lived in Chicago has died, and today is her funeral, and I'm too feeble to go. And I just wanted somebody to come and comfort me. Amazing. God sent you here, boy. Absolutely remarkable. We had a church member, and this is going to make you mad. We had a church member. Her husband was a deacon or an elder in the church, I forget which. He died, and I went to see her. Went in the back door, and she had boxes and all sorts of stuff stacked up. There was just a little path to the living room. sat down. We talked. I looked up and there was a broken window pane, and she had a pair of, looked to me like maybe a shirt or something stuck in the broken place. And it was cold. She had a potbelly stove, but it wasn't used. It wasn't burning. It was chilly and cold in there. And finally she said, oh, young man, she said, you catch your death of pneumonia. She said, just a minute. She went out to the kitchen and she brought back a handful of rose hips pills. She said, you take these, it'll keep you from catching pneumonia. This is Southern Ohio, and so you can have pneumonia in Southern Ohio. Then she told me the story. Husband was a leader in the church. The husband dies. They have the funeral, and that's it. She doesn't see or hear from anybody in the church after that. All alone. Up there in a little old shabby house. I got some real spunk, and I said, ma'am, I said, I want you to listen to what I've got to say, and don't you say no, because I won't take no for an answer. What you need is a good home-cooked meal and some kids to play with, and I'm coming to get you in 2 days and bring you to my house. And she didn't say no. So a couple of days later, we went and we picked her up and we brought her home. I still have in my mind a picture of this elderly woman sitting hands and knees on the rugs, playing with our 4 little boys. What a redemptive picture that was. It did more for her than a study on the 2,300 days. I watched that little lady gobble up a meal that she didn't cook with her own hands. That was redemptive. I guess what I'm saying for you, to you today, ask God to bring someone in your life. I don't care who it is. Someone in your life, maybe a total stranger. And God brings someone who needs you. I was in California, big church out there, and I had the sermon that day. And I talked about grief and how when the heart is broken, God has a way of mending the broken heart, lifting the heart. There are a lot of people who need a heart lift in our world today. Years after that appointment in that California church, a lady came to our grief recovery program in Fort Worth, Texas. She said, you know, I was in California and my husband died recently and I was just brokenhearted, and Sabbath came and I was trying to decide where I was going to go to church, and I had 3 options, and I ruled out the first 2, and I came to the third one, and you were preaching. You were preaching on God's power to heal the broken heart. It's exactly what I needed that day. Now I know why I chose that church over the other 2. Isn't that amazing? I tell you, a lot of you could tell stories like this over and over and over. And I tell you stories today because I want you to know that if you're not speaking to the heart, if you're not involved in heart lift work, you're being robbed of a lot of joy. Many people I work with were sad, and sometimes tears came down my face. One last story. A lady who was a member of another church in New Haven, Connecticut. She was terminally ill. They asked me to go visit her. I went to her bed. She began telling me about Jesus. Isn't that amazing? Sometimes you don't have to talk about Jesus. God talks for you. And this lady began telling me how she is planning to go to heaven. And she told me about the mansion that she's going to move into. And then every now and then she'd pause and say, "Oh, blessed hope, oh, blessed hope." And then she wanted me to pray. I prayed, bid her goodbye. And her daughter, who was standing on the opposite side of the bed, she showed me to the door. And she said, "Mr. Yeagley, I don't know what this blessed hope is all about. Mother talks about it all the time." But she said, "I'd sure like to know what it is." Isn't that neat? Here was a woman who was dying, but she knew how to give a heart lift. And I prayed to God that I would give her a heart lift too. So I invite you and I challenge you to join God's program and pray every day that God will send somebody your way. You know how you can do that? Go to Walmart. That's right. And the greeter who stands there in a cold breeze, don't just walk by with a cart. Stop. Get to know that greeter at the door. When you check your groceries out, don't just throw stuff on the belt and stick your card in. They have a name tag. Call them by name. We have one that we know. Her name is Carlotta. Carlotta has only a third of the teeth in her head. I would give anything to have enough money to send Carlotta to a dentist to get dentures. But we know Carlotta. We walk in and some of the ladies will say, "Hi, how you doing?" They tell us their life story. So go to Walmart. If you don't know where to start, you can start at Walmart. You know, the big wigs at Walmart, they don't know what you're doing in their store. But if they knew that you were doing evangelism in their store, you get the point. God wants all of us to be His children who work. We're not going to say a closing prayer today. We're going to sing our closing prayer today. If any little word of mine may make a dark life brighter, if any little song of mine may make a sad heart lighter, God, help me to speak the helping word and sweeten it with singing and drop it in some lonely vale to set the echoes ringing. We're going to sing that song. God help me speak the helping word and sweeten it with sin and drop it in some lonely vale to set the echoes ringing. If any little lullaby may make a heart life sweeter, if and sweeten it with singing, and drop it in some lonely bell, and bells ringing. If any little lift of mine may ease a toiling bender, God give me love and strength. We live for Him by lending. God, we make His helping word and sweeten it with singing, and drop it in some lonely bell to set the echoes ringing. Amen. Have a nice Sabbath. God bless you all.